Rancher gave a ride to an Apache widow. By law, he became the man she must marry. The morning was quiet, the kind of silence that stretched across the vast plains like a soft blanket. The sun had just begun to rise, casting golden light over the ranch. The air smelled faintly of dry grass and earth, warmed by the first rays of sunlight. In the distance, a herd of cattle moved slowly, their low moans blending with the whisper of wind across the plains. The rancher sat on his old pickup, checking the fences and paths he knew by heart. His hands, rough and calloused from years of work, rested on the steering wheel as he drove slowly down the dirt road. Every turn, every fence post, every path felt familiar, yet he always remained alert. Life on the ranch was hard, and the plains could be unforgiving if one lost focus for even a moment. Suddenly, he noticed a small figure on the side of the road. At first, he thought it was just a traveler, perhaps a local trying to make their way before the heat of the day. But as he drew closer, he saw her clearly. She was a woman, standing stiffly, trying to shield herself from the rising wind. Her clothes were simple and worn, and there was a certain sadness in her posture that immediately caught his attention. There was something vulnerable about her, yet she stood with a quiet dignity, as if she carried a lifetime of strength behind her grief. The rancher slowed the truck and rolled down the window. "You need a ride?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. He had learned over the years that kindness sometimes had to be offered without waiting for permission. The woman hesitated. Her eyes, dark and watchful, scanned him for signs of threat. But there was none, only a plain, honest man who had seen more than his share of life's hardships. "Grace, yes, thank you," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. She stepped forward, glancing at the road behind her as though making sure no one was watching, and then carefully climbed into the passenger seat. As they drove, the wind picked up, carrying dust across the road. The rancher kept his eyes on the horizon, speaking only when necessary. "Where are you headed?" he asked, not wanting to pry but also needing to make conversation to ease the silence. "Just to the next town," she said, her voice trailing off. There was a pause, and then she added almost in a whisper, "I have no other way." The rancher nodded, understanding more than she could know. There were many like her, people who traveled alone with little help, relying on strangers to get through the difficulties of life. He felt a quiet sense of responsibility. He had never met her before, yet something about her presence demanded care, attention. Perhaps it was the air of quiet resilience she carried, or perhaps it was simply the feeling that life on these plains required helping one another whenever possible. After a while, the woman spoke again, her words hesitant but tinged with curiosity. "Base, you live out here?" "Yes," the rancher replied. "Been on this land my whole life." "The ranch has been in my family for generations. Not much changes here, except the weather and the cattle." She nodded, looking out the window at the endless stretch of fields, the low hills in the distance, and the scattered trees that dotted the landscape. "It must be peaceful," she said, almost as if testing the word. "But peaceful can also mean lonely sometimes."
His voice carried a note of honesty, and she seemed to notice. There was an understanding between them, a shared sense of life's solitude, even if their experiences had been different.
The road twisted and turned, the dust rising behind them, and the silence returned, comfortable this time. Then, almost casually, the woman spoke, revealing a bit of her story. "I lost my husband recently," she said. Her words were quiet, but heavy with meaning. The rancher's eyes softened. He had heard of loss before too many times, and he understood the weight that came with it. "I am sorry," he said simply. Words were never enough, but they had to start somewhere. She gave a faint nod, pressing her lips together as if to hold back the flood of emotion. It's breath. Been hard. Traveling alone now feels different. Scary sometimes. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, filled with a mixture of vulnerability and cautious trust. He nodded, knowing that look well. "The world can be harsh," he said, "but there are still people who will help if you let them. Sometimes the first step is just accepting it." They drove on in silence again, the truck rumbling over the uneven road. The plains stretched endlessly around them, and the sky above glowed with the soft hues of morning. For a while it felt as if time itself had slowed, letting two strangers share a moment of quiet understanding in a world that often moved too quickly. Then, as if the universe had decided to remind them both of reality, the rancher remembered something from his childhood, a story his father had told him. In certain Apache traditions, he recalled, if a man gave aid to a widow, especially in times of danger or need, he might become her protector, sometimes even her husband by law. The memory came unbidden, and he mentioned it carefully. "Back when I was a boy, my father told me stories about the Apache customs," he said. "Sometimes helping someone in need, it could mean more than just being kind. There were laws, traditions, that made a man responsible for a woman he helped." The woman turned to him, surprised, her dark eyes wide. "You," breaths. "You know that law?" she asked softly, her voice carrying both curiosity and concern. "I heard the stories," he said. Her side tell science. "Never thought I'd see it in practice." He glanced at her, noticing the tension in her shoulders, the way she seemed suddenly aware of the implications of this ride. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind outside rattled the truck's windows and a distant crow called across the plains. The silence felt heavier now, filled with unspoken questions. The woman's gaze returned to the horizon, but he could see her mind racing. She had not expected this. An ordinary ride turning into a situation with such deep personal consequences. I didn't ask for this," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. I just needed a ride." "I understand," he said, his tone gentle. "I'm not here to force anything on you. I just want to help." The truck continued down the dirt road, each mile stretching the conversation and their thoughts. The plains rolled endlessly, dry grass brushing the wheels, and the morning heat began to rise. In those moments, the rancher noticed something remarkable. The widow carried herself with dignity, even in her grief. She was cautious, yes, but there was an inner strength that made him respect her immediately. But she did not beg or plead. She did not cry or complain. She simply endured, quietly and courageously. As the truck neared the next town, the woman spoke again, her voice steadier now. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. "I never thought a simple ride could mean anything more." He nodded slowly. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said. "Sometimes it's the small moments, the decisions we make for others, the help we offer, that change everything." Breath. She looked at him then, really looked, noticing the lines of experience on his face, the honesty in his eyes, the steady calm in his voice. You really mean that?" she asked, almost incredulously, breaking. "I do," he replied. "I don't know what the law says, or what tradition demands. I only know that right now, you needed help. That's all I care about." For the first time, a small smile flickered across her face, hesitant, but genuine. It was a fragile thing, yet it carried with it a spark of hope. She realized that not all help came with strings attached. Some people offered care simply because it was the right thing to do. The truck finally rolled into the edge of town, the buildings rising like a small oasis in the endless plains.
The woman glanced at the rancher, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty.
The ride was over, yet the moment felt heavier than she expected. There was more to consider than just the miles traveled. There was the weight of tradition, the shadow of law, and the stirrings of something she could not yet name. "I thank you," she said softly, her hand brushing the door handle as if to steady herself. "You're welcome," he replied. "Take care of yourself. Psst. Whatever happens next, remember, you're not alone." "Bed," she nodded, stepping down from the truck with careful grace. As she walked toward the town, the rancher watched her go, a mixture of admiration and concern filling his chest. He knew that the ride had changed more than just her day. It had begun a chain of events neither of them could yet foresee. As the truck rumbled away, he thought about the stories his father had told, the traditions he had half believed as a boy, and how suddenly they seemed real and pressing. Life on the plains was full of challenges, and the intersection of law, custom, and human connection could be as complicated as it was unexpected. But for now, he felt a quiet certainty. He had done what he could, and that alone mattered. For the woman, the ride became more than transportation. It was a moment of trust, a test of courage, and the beginning of a story she had never imagined she would be part of. Breaths. She carried with her a mix of gratitude, uncertainty, and a strange sense of possibility. The plains stretched ahead, endless and open, holding both risk and promise. And in that quiet morning light, two strangers had crossed paths in a way that would shape the days to come. The widow walked slowly through the small town, the dust from the road still clinging to her shoes. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one heavier than the last. She had not expected the ride to carry such significance, nor had she imagined that a simple act of kindness could place her under the weight of tradition. She had grown up knowing about the customs of her people, but never had she imagined finding herself in the position where law and culture demanded something from her, something she was not sure she was ready to give. The town itself was quiet in the morning light. Wooden buildings with peeling paint lined the narrow streets, and the sound of a few shopkeepers opening for the day echoed softly. Children ran past, laughing and chasing each other, oblivious to the burdens that adults carried. Breath. The widow drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of loneliness and grief pressing against her chest. She had lost her husband only months ago, and the world had suddenly felt colder, emptier. She was not ready to allow someone new into her life, no matter what law or custom demanded. Meanwhile, the rancher returned to his property, the wide-open plain stretching endlessly around him. He thought about the ride, about the woman's dark, searching eyes, and about the quiet dignity she carried. He could not stop replaying the conversation in his mind, the mention of the law, the uncertainty in her voice, and the subtle fear she had tried to hide. It was not just the law that weighed on him. It was the realization that helping someone in need could have consequences far beyond what he had imagined. Yet, beneath that weight, there was a growing sense of responsibility. He had offered her a ride, yes, but now he felt as if he had been entrusted with something more.
Word of the ride spread quickly through the town and the surrounding ranches.
Neighbors who had seen the truck drive past whispered to each other about the encounter.
In small communities like this, nothing stayed private for long.
"Did you hear about the rancher?" one elderly man asked another. "The one who gave the widow a ride? Seems the old law applies here." The widow overheard some of these murmurs as she ran errands for basic supplies. Her stomach tightened with discomfort. She had hoped that no one would notice or care about the ride. But in a town where tradition still held strong, curiosity quickly turned to judgment. People started looking at her differently, measuring her every move. She felt eyes on her in the shops, in the streets, and even when she passed by the town square. Some faces were friendly, others scrutinizing, all reminding her that the path she was walking now was complicated. Back on the ranch, the man thought deeply about the situation. Psst. He had grown up in this region, familiar with both the laws of the land and the traditions of the Apache people who lived nearby. He remembered the stories his father told him of how customs sometimes dictated lives in ways that could not easily be ignored. Still, he did not want the woman to feel trapped or pressured. He respected her independence and her grief. But at the same time, he could not ignore the fact that, under tradition, he now carried a duty to her. A duty that was serious and binding. Days passed, and the widow tried to continue her life as normally as possible, but it was not easy. Each time she stepped outside, she was reminded of the incident, of the ride, and of the law that now hovered over her like a shadow. She spoke little to her neighbors, avoiding conversations where the subject might come up. She tried to keep her mind occupied with simple tasks, chores, and the daily rhythm of survival. Yet at night, when the world was quiet, the thoughts returned. She wondered what it truly meant to be bound by custom, what it would mean to have someone assigned to protect her by law. Could it be freedom in disguise, or would it be another form of limitation? The rancher, too, found himself thinking about her constantly. He wondered what she was feeling, whether she understood the law as well as he did, and how she viewed him now after the ride. Each evening, as he worked on repairs to fences or guided the cattle, his mind wandered to her. He could picture her standing by the roadside, her posture steady despite the storm that had raged around her. He could hear the faint quiver in her voice when she mentioned her loss.
He felt a pull to reach out to her, not as a lawman or as someone bound by tradition, but as a man who genuinely cared.
One afternoon, he decided to visit the town under the pretense of checking supplies. As he approached the main street, he saw the widow walking along the dusty road, carrying a small basket of goods. Her eyes flicked up, and she hesitated when she saw him. There was a mixture of emotions there: surprise, caution, and perhaps a faint flicker of something else he could not yet name. He waved politely and called out, "Good afternoon. How are you holding up?" She paused, her grip tightening on the basket. "I'm managing," she said carefully. Her tone was polite, but guarded, frowned. She was not ready to let him, or anyone, see how much the situation was affecting her. He nodded, understanding her need for space. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. If you need anything." You know where I live?"
He did not press further, giving her the opportunity to decide whether to engage.
The widow considered his words. She had spent weeks avoiding the thought of the law and the implications of the ride, but now she realized she could not ignore it forever. She had choices to make, and she knew that each choice carried weight. Reluctantly, she replied, "Thank you. I appreciate that." The rancher smiled gently. "It's nothing. I only want to help." Their conversation was interrupted by the sounds of children laughing nearby and the ringing of a blacksmith's hammer. The town felt alive and ordinary, but the undercurrent of expectation remained. Both of them knew that neighbors and elders were watching, that their every action would be noticed and judged. Still, in that moment, there was a pause, a small space where they could interact as people rather than as a widow and a man bound by law. Over the next few days, the rancher found himself making more trips to town, not out of obligation but to check on her subtly. He respected her boundaries, never imposing himself, but his presence became a quiet reassurance. For the widow, this created a complex mixture of emotions. She was grateful, certainly, but also wary. Could she allow someone into her life so soon after her loss? And if she did, would it be her choice or the law's one evening? The widow sat on the edge of a small creek outside town, watching the water ripple over smooth stones. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the plains. Breath. She thought about her late husband, about the life they had shared, and about the uncertain path ahead. She realized that the law, the tradition, and the rancher's kindness were intertwined in ways she could not easily unravel, but yet she also felt a strange comfort. Here was someone who did not demand her immediate obedience, someone who seemed willing to wait and understand.
Meanwhile, the rancher worked late into the evening, repairing fences and mending broken tools.
As he paused to look out over the horizon, he thought about the woman, about her quiet strength, and about the subtle way she had affected him. He recognized that this was more than a matter of tradition or duty. There was a human connection forming, delicate and fragile, yet undeniably present. He wondered how it might develop if given time, patience, and understanding. Days turned into a week, and with each passing day the widow and the rancher found themselves thinking more about one another. Neither spoke of the law openly, yet its presence was always felt, a silent guide influencing their choices. The widow began to realize that she could choose how to respond to the situation, that tradition did not have to mean loss of agency. She could acknowledge the law while still maintaining her independence, shaping the outcome in a way that felt right to her. One morning, a sudden dust storm swept across the plains. The wind tore at clothing, dust stung the eyes, and the world seemed to vanish in a brown haze. The widow struggled to keep her footing as she walked toward town. Without thinking, the rancher appeared, coming from his property, guiding her to a sheltered spot behind a low ridge. His calm presence steadied her, and for a moment she allowed herself to lean on him, not out of obligation, but because she trusted him. As they waited for the storm to pass, she spoke quietly.
I didn't expect things to be like this, she admitted. I just wanted a simple ride, nothing more.
He nodded. I understand. Life sometimes complicates the simplest actions. But you're safe now, and that's what matters. The storm subsided, leaving the plains quiet once more. Breath. The air smelled of wet earth and sagebrush, fresh and clean. The widow felt a sense of relief, but also a growing awareness. The rancher's presence, his willingness to help without demanding, had begun to change something inside her. Breaths. She was not yet ready to fully accept the law's implications, but she could no longer ignore the connection forming between them. By the end of the week, the widow realized she needed to confront the situation. Best. She visited the rancher at his property, not to declare anything, but to speak openly. I need to understand, she said simply. What does this tradition mean? What does it mean for me? The rancher listened carefully, explaining the law with honesty and respect. He emphasized that while tradition had its rules, it did not erase choice. She could acknowledge it, or she could challenge it. What mattered most, he said, was that she understood her own heart and made her decisions deliberately. The widow left with a sense of clarity she had not expected. The law was still there, the community still watched, but for the first time she felt a small spark of control over her own fate. She understood that tradition did not have to cage her. It could coexist with her independence if she chose to navigate it wisely. And so, part 2 closed with the widow standing at a crossroads, the plains stretching endlessly before her. The law was real, the tradition demanding, but so too was her strength and resolve. The rancher remained a quiet presence in the background, a man of integrity, patience, and understanding. Together, whether by law or by choice, their lives were beginning to intertwine in ways that neither could yet fully imagine. The days grew longer, and the rancher's routine carried on with its usual rhythm. He rose before dawn, checked the fences, and tended to the cattle, each task performed with a practiced ease that came from years on the plains. Breath. Yet even in the quiet work, his thoughts often drifted to the widow. Breath. He could not help but think of her walking through the town streets, carrying her basket of goods, or sitting quietly by the creek, staring at the water as though searching for answers in its gentle flow. For her part, the widow found herself thinking of him more often than she liked to admit.
There was something about the rancher that was different from anyone she had met since her husband's death.
He was steady, practical, and strong, yet there was a softness in the way he spoke, a patience in the way he listened. His presence did not overwhelm her. It offered a quiet sense of safety she had not felt in months, and yet the shadow of tradition and law still lingered, reminding her that her gratitude alone might not be enough to satisfy the expectations of the community. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and hot over the plains, a situation arose that tested both their courage and trust. The rancher had noticed smoke in the distance while tending the cattle. At first it seemed faint, barely more than a haze, but as he scanned the horizon it became clear that a wildfire was spreading quickly, driven by the dry wind and tall grasses. For he knew immediately that the fire could threaten the town, the ranch, and anyone caught in its path, including the widow, who was still walking to town that day. Without hesitation, he mounted his horse and rode toward her. The wind was fierce, blowing dust and dry leaves across the plains, making visibility difficult. The widow, seeing the smoke on the horizon, felt a surge of panic. She began to run, but the uneven terrain slowed her, and the heat made it difficult to breathe. Then, just as the fire began to edge closer, the rancher appeared. He guided her to his horse and insisted she climb onto it, holding her steady as they galloped away from the flames. Once they were at a safe distance, both of them dismounted, their breaths heavy and hearts racing. The widow looked at the rancher, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear, relief, and something else. Something she could not yet name. You saved me, she said softly, her voice trembling. I'm glad you're safe, he replied simply. That's all that matters right now. The moment hung in the air, charged with the intensity of shared danger. For the first time, the widow realized that her feelings for the rancher went beyond mere gratitude. She had trusted him with her safety, and that trust had deepened in a way she could not ignore. In the days following the fire, the two spent more time together on the ranch, not out of obligation, but out of a growing desire to understand one another. The widow helped with chores when she could, learning to feed the cattle, mend fences, and tend the small garden that supplied the ranch with vegetables. She discovered that the work, though physically demanding, offered a sense of purpose she had not felt since her husband's passing. The rancher watched her carefully, offering guidance when needed but never criticizing, always patient and encouraging. During these shared moments, they began to speak more openly about their lives. The widow told him stories of her childhood, of her family, and of her late husband. She spoke of the traditions she had grown up with, of the ways her people honored their ancestors, and of the responsibilities that came with being a widow. The rancher listened, absorbing every word, his respect for her growing with each story. He shared his own experiences as well. The long hours on the plains, the challenges of running a ranch, and the lessons he had learned from his father about integrity, hard work, and responsibility. As they worked and spoke, the widow began to see the rancher not just as a protector assigned by law, but as a person of genuine character. She noticed the way he treated the animals with care, how he respected the land, and how he always considered the consequences of his actions. She began to feel a growing admiration for him, mixed with a cautious curiosity about what their connection might mean. Despite the warmth that was building between them, the shadow of tradition remained. The widow often thought about the law, about the expectations placed upon her, and about how the community would view any decision she made. She feared that choosing to engage with the rancher might be seen as yielding to pressure, rather than following her own heart. Yet the more she observed him, the more she saw his patience, kindness, and respect, the more she realized that her fear was slowly being replaced by trust. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, the two sat on a wooden fence overlooking the ranch. The air was still, the only sounds coming from the distant lowing of cattle and the soft rustle of wind through the tall grass. The widow turned to the rancher, her expression thoughtful. "I keep thinking about the law," she said quietly, "about what it means and what it demands." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "It's true," he said. "Tradition and law can be strict, but they don't have to take away your choice. What matters is what you decide for yourself." She looked at him, searching his eyes for sincerity, and found it there, steady and unwavering. "I want to make the right choice," she admitted. "I don't want to act out of fear, or because others expect it. I want to understand what it really means for both of us." The rancher reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "Then we take it one step at a time," he said. "We see what comes, and we make choices together. You don't have to face this alone." The widow felt a sense of relief she had not experienced in months. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt that someone saw her as more than just a widow bound by law. Someone saw her as a person with feelings, thoughts, and the power to make her own decisions. In the following weeks, their relationship grew in subtle ways. They shared meals, laughed over small accidents while tending the ranch, and even went for long walks across the plains, talking about life, loss, and hope. Each moment, no matter how small, built a foundation of trust and understanding. The widow began to recognize that the law, while significant, did not define her. It was her own choices, her own courage, and her own heart that would guide her future. However, the community continued to watch, and their presence together was not without whispers. Some neighbors were supportive, admiring the quiet care the rancher showed, while others questioned whether the widow was being pressured into a situation she might later regret. The widow felt the tension but chose to focus on the rancher's words and actions rather than the gossip. She realized that while the opinions of others might influence life in a small town, they could not dictate her feelings or her choices. Then, one afternoon, another challenge tested the bond that had been growing between them. A sudden illness swept through part of the ranch, affecting a small group of calves. The rancher worked tirelessly to care for them, but he knew he could not manage everything alone. The widow, seeing his concern and determination, stepped forward to help. She tended the calves, mixed their feed, and followed his instructions carefully. Together, they worked through the day, side by side, until the animals were stable once more. By the end of that day, both were exhausted, yet there was a quiet sense of accomplishment and mutual respect. The widow looked at the rancher and realized how much she admired his resilience, his patience, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. She also recognized that she had grown stronger herself, learning that she could face challenges not just as a widow, but as a capable and independent woman. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together by the small creek that ran near the ranch. The water reflected the stars above, creating a scene of quiet beauty. The widow spoke softly, almost to herself. "I never thought life could feel this calm again. Not since my husband." She paused, the words catching in her throat. The rancher listened silently, understanding the depth of her emotion without needing to respond immediately. He knew that grief was not something to be rushed or ignored, and that simply being present could offer more comfort than any words. After a long moment, he said gently, "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. Whatever comes, we face it together."
The widow felt a warmth in his words, a reassurance that was more powerful than any law or tradition.
She realized that trust, respect, and shared effort were creating a bond that went beyond obligation. It was a connection built on understanding, empathy, and genuine care. As part 3 drew to a close, the widow and the rancher stood on the edge of the plains, looking out over the land that had shaped both of their lives. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and the expectations of tradition together. Each challenge had strengthened their trust in one another, and each shared moment had deepened their understanding. The future remained uncertain, and the law still hovered over them, but for the first time they both felt that they could navigate it together. In the quiet of the evening, with the wind whispering through the grass and the sky ablaze with stars, the widow realized that her heart had begun to open again. She was not bound by obligation alone. She was choosing to let someone in carefully and deliberately, trusting that her choice was her own. The rancher, standing beside her, understood the responsibility and the privilege of that trust, and he silently vowed to honor it every day. The plains stretched endlessly before them, a landscape of challenge and beauty, mirroring the journey they were undertaking together. And as the night deepened, both felt a quiet certainty. Whatever the law required, whatever the community expected, their growing connection, built on respect, courage, and understanding, was theirs to shape. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the land in soft gold and pink. The air smelled of earth, grass, and a faint hint of dew. But on the ranch, life continued in its quiet rhythm. Cattle grazing, fences needing repair, and the wind whispering through the open fields. But for the widow and the rancher, the day felt different. There was a sense of anticipation, of decisions long considered finally coming to light. For weeks, the widow had reflected on the law, the customs, and the expectations placed upon her. She had spent long nights by the creek, thinking about her late husband, about the life she had once known, and about the uncertain path ahead. She had also thought about the rancher, not just as a protector assigned by tradition, but as a man she had come to trust, respect, and even care for. The fire, the illness of the calves, and the shared work had revealed his character in ways that words alone could not.
That morning, she decided to visit the ranch. She walked across the open plains, her steps steady, her mind focused.
The rancher was already working in the barn, repairing a broken fence. The sun warmed his back, highlighting the lines of experience etched into his face. When he saw her approaching, he paused and straightened, a small, genuine smile forming.
"You're up early," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I needed to think," she replied softly.
Her eyes met his, steady and thoughtful.
About everything.
Breath. About the law, the tradition, and about us. He nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment. Take your time, he said. No one can make this decision for you. It has to come from your heart. They walked together to a quiet spot overlooking the plains. The horizon stretched endlessly, the land bathed in morning light. Peaceful, yet powerful. The widow took a deep breath and spoke, her voice calm but firm.
"I have thought about it all. The law, the tradition."
I understand what it says, and I understand what it could mean. But I also understand myself.
"And I have made a choice."
The rancher waited silently, his heart steady but full of anticipation. He had never wanted her to feel forced or obligated. He only wanted her to choose freely, to trust her own judgment. I choose to accept it, she said finally, not because anyone else expects it, not because of the law, but because I trust you, because I see your character, and because I feel that this could be the right partnership for both of us. The rancher's eyes softened. By it. You agree to the marriage?
"Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I am ready to move forward, not out of obligation, but because I want to."
I want to build a life that honors my past but also allows me to live fully again. A quiet sense of relief washed over both of them. They had navigated danger, grief, and tradition together, and now they could face the future with clarity and mutual respect. The rancher extended his hand and she took it, a simple gesture carrying the weight of trust, choice, and shared understanding. The days that followed were filled with preparations, not for ceremony or spectacle, but for life. They worked together to ensure the ranch was in order, shared meals, and began to plan the rhythm of daily life as partners. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and quiet conversations late into the evening. Each interaction strengthened their bond, creating a sense of home and partnership that neither had experienced in years. The community, which had watched their every move with curiosity and judgment, gradually came to understand the depth of their connection. People saw that the widow's choice was her own, that the rancher's respect for her independence was genuine, and that their partnership was built on trust rather than obligation. Supportive neighbors offered congratulations, advice, and practical help, while those who had doubted slowly recognized that the bond between them was real and voluntary. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and orange, the widow and the rancher sat together on a low hill overlooking the plains. The air was warm, carrying the scents of grass, earth, and the faint tang of distant wildflowers. They watched the cattle grazing in the fading light, the world calm and still around them. "I never thought life could feel this peaceful again," she said softly. Her hand brushed against his, tentative but certain. "After losing him, after everything, I didn't know if I could feel hope again." The rancher listened quietly, understanding the depth of her words. "Hope is something we find slowly," he said. "Sometimes it's hidden in small moments, helping each other, sharing the work, facing challenges together. And sometimes it comes when we least expect it." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips.
I see that now.
"And I see you. I trust you, and I believe that together we can face whatever comes next." Boo. Their conversation drifted into silence, not awkward, but comfortable, the kind of silence that exists between people who have faced challenges, shared experiences, and come to understand one another deeply. The rancher glanced at her, noting the quiet strength in her posture, the resilience in her eyes, and the gentleness in her voice. He felt a profound respect for the woman she had become, a woman who could grieve, reflect, and choose freely. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and new. They divided tasks according to their strengths. He cared for the cattle, repaired fences, and managed the land, while she tended the garden, helped with chores, and managed small tasks that allowed the ranch to thrive. But more importantly, they worked together as partners, consulting each other, supporting each other, and sharing the responsibilities and joys of daily life. One morning, while tending the garden together, the widow laughed at a small mistake she had made, spilling soil over her shoes. The rancher joined in her laughter, a deep, hearty sound that echoed across the plains. "See," he said, smiling. "Life isn't always perfect, but that's what makes it worth living." She smiled back, feeling a lightness she had not known in months. "I see that now," she said. "And I'm glad we're in it together." As the weeks passed, the widow began to feel fully at home on the ranch. The land, the animals, and the daily work became familiar comforts, but it was the partnership with the rancher that gave her life its new meaning. They celebrated small victories, like a healthy calf born or a fence repaired without incident. They faced small challenges, like unexpected weather or minor accidents, but each was met with patience, cooperation, and growing understanding. One afternoon, a neighbor came by to check on them, bringing news from the town. "I see you two are doing well," the neighbor said, smiling. "Seems the town has finally accepted your choice."
You've shown them it was made with heart, not obligation. The widow nodded, feeling a quiet pride.
"It's been important to me that this is my decision," she said. "Not anyone else's, and that we respect each other in it. The rancher added, "We've learned a lot from each other. Life on the plains is not easy, but sharing it makes it better." The sun set that evening in shades of purple and gold, casting long shadows across the ranch. The widow and the rancher stood side by side, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. There was no grand ceremony, no loud announcement, only the quiet recognition that their lives were now intertwined, by choice and by trust. That night, as they prepared to rest after a long day, the widow felt a sense of peace she had not known since her husband's passing. She realized that life had given her a second chance, not to forget the past, but to honor it while embracing the future. The rancher's presence, patience, and respect had helped her navigate grief, tradition, and the pressures of community judgment. Yes. She felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing she was not alone. The rancher, too, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had respected her independence, supported her choices, and shared in her journey. He knew that their bond was more than law or tradition. It was built on mutual respect, trust, and the quiet understanding that true partnership required patience, care, and commitment. In the following weeks, they continued to live their lives together on the ranch, facing challenges with teamwork and celebrating small joys with gratitude. Their connection deepened not through grand gestures, but through daily acts of support, kindness, and understanding. Rest. Every meal shared, every fence repaired, and every animal tended became a testament to the strength of their partnerships. One evening, as the wind whispered through the plains and the sky glowed with the fading light of day, the widow reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced grief, uncertainty, and the weight of tradition. She had navigated danger, community judgment, and her own fears. And in the end, she had chosen freely, building a partnership based on trust, respect, and genuine care. The rancher joined her on the porch of the small ranch house, bringing a cup of tea. "It's been a long journey," he said softly, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the sunset.
"Yes," she agreed, "but it's been worth it."
Beth rasped, taking her hand gently. "We face the future together," he said. "Whatever comes, we'll face it as partners." She squeezed his hand, feeling a quiet strength in the gesture. "Together," she echoed. And so, life on the ranch continued. The plain stretched endlessly around them, a landscape of beauty, challenge, and possibility. The widow and the rancher had navigated the complexities of law, tradition, and grief, and had emerged with a partnership built on trust, understanding, and choice. They had learned that even in the face of expectation and hardship, it was possible to create a life that honored the past while embracing the future. The sun set fully now, and the stars emerged, twinkling over the wide-open plains. The widow and the rancher sat together in quiet contentment, knowing that their bond was theirs to shape, their lives theirs to build, and their partnership a testament to courage, respect, and love. The journey had been long, the challenges real, and the lessons hard-won, but in the end, they had found peace, companionship, and hope on the land that had shaped them both. And as the night deepened over the ranch, one thing was clear. Life, with all its trials and uncertainties, could also bring renewal, trust, and a second chance at happiness.